Yeah. That was the year that I first encountered Rudolf Steiner's book, How to Know Higher Worlds, 40 years ago, and have been a big fan of his work and related work in spiritual science. And this past summer was like, dang, there's some things that I'm still not clear on, I really want to get clear on. And one of them was around Egypt, the ancient Egyptian mysteries. And I remember telling Luke, it's like, dang, I'm going to figure out this Egyptian thing. I got to really get to the bottom of it, because in my background, I have kind of a varied background, which at this point in my life is allowing me to bring from some different fields. I actually had a time where I was working in software as a systems analyst, and then got into writing technical manuals, which actually fits with the theme tonight, looking at Egyptian iconography as technical manuals. So I've had that in my background along with spiritual science, and then of course both Laura and I have done the advanced training of biogeometry, working with Dr. Ibrahim Karim's work in biogeometry. So Dr. Ibrahim Karim, of course, being an Egyptian from Cairo, is one of the world's leading experts in energy science. Tonight we've got someone with us here tonight who prefers to be off camera and remain somewhat anonymous to the wider world internet, because he holds deep esoteric knowledge and he values his life. So we're not going to refer to him by his real name. We're going to just pseudonym. We'll call him Bob, generic Bob. This is not a luxury to sit here and to just conjecture about the mysteries of ancient Egypt. This is important that we remember and awaken those capacities that we had back then and bring them into the present moment. What we have now in our current time in Western culture is fantastic. It's amazing. The technology we have, like, look at the technology that's going on in here with cameras and smartphones and laptops and TVs. I love it. I love technology. I've just made up my mind. I want to love technology, new and old. So I have power over it rather than it having power over me. But in our current Western scientific way of thinking, we've really set limits on ourselves. Partly because of this acquisition of analytical thinking and critical thinking that comes with the growth of ourselves as an ego being. So we've gained a lot in this capacity to think as an independent ego being. But it's been a trade-off with what we used to have in previous times. And this is one of the tenets of spiritual science laid out by Dr. Rudolf Steiner, is that there is an evolution of consciousness. That the way we think and perceive and function in our inner life is quite different today than it was in past evolutionary epochs. The Greeks, the Romans thought a certain way, the Egyptians, Chaldeans a different way, the Persians, the Chinese, the ancient Indian. So what the Egyptians had in their capacity to be more attuned to the metaphysical, and we'll see that as we start to look at some of their iconography and papyrus and stuff that records the images that predominate their consciousness. They were very much more turned up and out to the cosmos, and only beginning to consider about the physical world and the working with matter, which they took a long way over their period of 30 dynasties and even the pre-dynastic period. Huge evolution of turning to the manipulation of matter. We, at this point, have great skill in doing that, in creating, LCD screens and wireless technology. Like, we've really figured a lot out. But the trade-off is that we've lost our connection to higher worlds, to the divine layers, and to the cosmos that they had. So we feel that. A lot of people are trying to awaken what you could call more of that shamanistic mindset through, breathing techniques, to awaken higher senses, or taking psychoactive substances to get back into that, they're called entheogens. Entheo, in God. Taking entheogenic substances to reawaken that shamanistic capacity to connect with higher worlds. So what we're going to do tonight, going down the rabbit hole, is to remember, piece together with the pictures and the ideas of what we had in the past, while at the same time being very modern in thinking about it and talking about it and being analytical. So we're really tonight doing what we need to be doing in remembering the past, while at the same time having the cognitive capacity to think and talk about it. The thing about the Egyptians is that they recognized that they were multidimensional beings. They recognized they were multidimensional beings and were able to live on multi-dimensions at the same time. We've lost that. We're very much living now like on a unidimensional existence, just the material plane and the five senses. So here's the cover of the book that we're looking at tonight by James Ernest Brown. And just a little bit of introduction to him. He's not an Egyptologist. He's not really even a scientist or an archaeologist. He is actually a builder. He's been building buildings all his life. So that's his perspective. When he looks at things, he's a builder. He looks at plans, technical manuals. And he took up an interest in Egypt back at an early stage in his life. I would say it was probably in his 20s. And you see photographs of him when he was very young and going to Egypt and photographing everything that he could. He just had this immense passion. And he's been there numerous times and has, I think, like 10 to 15,000 photographs of Egypt. And that would have been even before digital cameras. Right? He started back in the 70s and has amassed a tremendous amount of images and decided to create these 3 books: Electric Ancient Egyptians, Fire in the Middle, that deals with the pyramid. We'll be looking at that next time. And then Giza's Industrial Complex. This is a trilogy of books that just came out in the last really 3 years or so. Things like technical manuals. So in the beginning, it says, oh, look, here's pictures of technical manuals, like how to assemble a cabinet. That there's not much in the way of words. It's just pictures of people doing things, which is meant to transmit information. Kind of cute. Showing you that it's a 2-man job. Don't do it by yourself. So yeah, we're used to these sorts of symbols to give us instruction just in a graphic. And so that is his approach to working with the iconography here.
And just add a little bit in terms of symbols. Keep in mind that symbols are processed directly. They're not intermediated by the quotes conscious mind, so they're much more powerful than the words that explain, can be used to explain.
Yeah, and it leaves something for the person's own subjective interpretation, which is really what we want to tap into. It's like, what does that say to you? What does that picture impress upon you? All right, so diving into chapter 2, talking about static electricity as a natural form of energy. So here's just showing the balance between protons and electrons in the scale of things within an atom. And that atoms are made up of a nucleus, and at the nucleus is the protons, and orbiting around the nucleus is electrons. And generally an atom is balanced between the positive of proton and the negative of electron. But when there's a buildup of a charge, then an electron can leave one atom and join another atom. And this is what is known as a quantum leap, which we'll talk about more in a second here. Here's some examples of electricity in the atmosphere. Of course, lightning is striking the Earth hundreds of times a day, building up the charge in the atmosphere of electricity. Here's a picture of a kitty. Of course, cat fur is highly sensitive to static electricity. Come on in, grab a seat. Yeah. Here's lightning striking the Eiffel Tower. And then, Bob, do you want to explain that fourth picture there? Because you've got the same t-shirt on.
Sure, so that site is called Warden Cliff. It's on Long Island. It was the last laboratory that Nikola Tesla built. And it was eventually, the tower was destroyed after he went bankrupt. The bottom remained, and it has subsequently been rebuilt. But basically, to talk about the purpose of it was to be the first in a series of towers to broadcast power and charge the atmosphere. In other words, build up an electrical charge all around the Earth that you could access merely by putting up a pole. The challenge was that this was in direct opposition to the world of wires, which is what we live in, that he had been the source of creating AC power, Niagara Falls, all that kind of stuff.
So the important point around this is that there is a reawakening of the use of atmospheric electricity that could be free electricity that we have access to. But the powers that be crushed this down. I'm not going to go into the whole story on Tesla, but there are forces that are blocking humanity's ability to tap into what's naturally there by corrupt, greedy forces and so forth, dark forces that oppose human advancement, the evolution of consciousness, and our liberation. And what happened with Tesla back in the 1940s and 50s is stands out, of what we're up against. This is not a cakewalk to free energy and being able to tap into what is naturally there, which is why this is what we're doing here tonight, to awaken ourselves to something of the battle there is, to tap into what's naturally there. But we have to first know what's available. So here we've got some Egyptian gods for us. These are on steles, which are engraved rocks that they carve their icons into. but this raises kind of a big question at this point. What is electricity? We should move forward very carefully, not assuming that we understand what electricity is, that we don't necessarily understand the spiritual side of electricity. And even science, in a way, today can't fully explain what electricity is. We're using it, we're plugged in, or wired to the hill, but we don't fully understand what it is, and we'll look into this further down the road as to what is the spiritual nature of electricity. All right, here we are looking at what's known as a Leyden jar. Bob, you want to explain Leyden jars?
Okay, so there's basically, the basic concept is you can build up a charge and then you can release a charge. Leyden jars are the earliest version of what we now call capacitors. They're called Leyden jars because of the town they were originally discovered on, but it would appear the Egyptians were using the equivalent of Leyden jars. And essentially what you've got there is what's hanging down is connected to an external source of electricity, and then you're building up a charge inside. This is a jar. It could, we're showing glass jars here, but it could have been a solid, like a clay jar. It could have been something else, so that it allows you to gradually build up a charge and then release that charge.
Yeah, but these are not plugged into electricity. Sorry,
they're capturing static electricity.
Yeah, they're capturing static electricity.
Yes.
In the atmosphere, but you said this is plugged into an electrical source.
Well, it can be. In some of the experiments in Europe, they were plugged in. Again, the Egyptians were using static, it would appear.
Yeah. So these Leyden jars, these are not plugged into anything. This is a string with some metal foil on it that can detect the approach of an electrical storm 24 hours ahead of time. It could be gold or silver tin, just very thin piece of metal that will begin to move in response to the buildup of static electricity in the atmosphere, which can be detected 24 hours ahead of time, and then afterwards there's like a window of 24 hours where they'll start moving. And so what we have here on the left side, Egyptologists say, oh, this is a children's crown. It's just costume jewelry for children to play with. It's really fun reading this book because he's reinterpreting so much of what Egyptology potentially is wrong in their interpretation of these things. This is more likely similar to a modern day Leyden jar, where they would be able to detect the buildup of atmospheric electricity, so they know it's coming, and then they can tap into it for purposes when it's there. If you have any questions or comments, please, let's join the conversation.
I know some spiders fly using electricity, so I was wondering what effect would spiders feel?
Well, for sure, animals. This is humans trying to figure out technology, but animals already have it built in. They have the built-in technology of what's going on in the atmosphere, and they can prognosticate this stuff well in advance. We know when the tsunami hit that the animals cleared out of the area hours ahead of time, while people were still sitting on the beach enjoying their pina coladas, and then eventually wiped out.
We still have that sense as well. It's just that we're desensitized to it because.
Thank you for being there, remembering to remind us. Exactly. Yes, we have that sense. But as I was saying before you got here, is that we've traded off that sense that the Egyptians and other cultures had for analytical thinking in our Western mindset that lives in one dimension. Whereas the Egyptians were multidimensional. living on with awareness on multiple levels at the same time. We've got to get back to that. Here we've got looks like a lightning rod here in his hand. These are different staffs. And here at the bottom is modern lightning rods. You can see similarities. And he's wearing solid gold sandals that would ground him to the earth. We'll see more of that coming up. Relief showing Horus connecting the rod to Osiris. Okay, on to chapter 3, how the hand generates static electricity. And here's a picture using curling photography, where you can actually, I think it's based on registering the heat around the body and interpreting it with different colors. So on the left here is a fingertip of an average person, and then over here is a trained healer. And it shows how the energy coming out of the hands can be amplified and utilized. Showing pictures of the field around the body, the aura. So let's just do that. Let's just break friction with our palms and experience building up static electricity and heat. Of course, when you have more heat, there's more conductivity. And then just moving them apart slowly. See if you can detect something of the field that's there. Which is now going to have a charge. And depending on the way the poles are at any given time, it could be a sense of attraction or a sense of repulsion.
If you tune into it, it'll have some physicality to it at a sensitive level. You can also use this to charge yourself up before doing something like Qigong to check the state of your feet.
So here we have examples of the hand position in the Egyptian iconographies. From the top, you see lots of this. Down here we have a healer working with Reiki. The hands don't touch the body. It's a hands-off modality where the hands do radiate this field and can be transmitted to another. Anybody here ever gone to Reiki healer and felt the effects of that radiating out of their hands? Yeah. Can be very visceral, but sometimes people don't feel it. But that's an ability that can be cultivated. Here's Chinese medicine chart showing the electrical pathways that are used for acupuncture. Down at the bottom here we've got a form of electric acupuncture. send electrical impulses along the meridian paths. The picture on the right showing heat that's being put into the acupuncture points. And of course up here at the top, this was an image found in what's known as the physician's tomb. And apparently something's being done to the hands. It looks like maybe a lineup of clients that are receiving some sort of hand healing. And this definitely looks like a technical manual. I'm not sure exactly what the hieroglyphs are saying, but the pictures are showing different procedures where the hands are being held out. This is what it's called the power position. So try now just putting your hands face out, similar to the imagery here. And with your intention, what were you saying, Bob, before about how this, the power position?
Yeah, so you're broadcasting when you go into this position.
Yeah. This is broadcast position.
Now, interesting notice on the far right, the right hand is slightly forward than the left. So it's not this, it's this. Because again, traditionally the right transmits and the left receives. So he's more transmitting than receiving.
I find when I dance, I really like to engage my hands. I was at Drum Circle in Kensington Park yesterday, and when I dance, it's not so much about my feet. I just kind of, Laura laughs because I just sort of shuffle back and forth. But my hands feel like they want to dance, and working different angles, and it feels like I'm really affecting the field of the dance for myself, for one, but it also feels like it's engaging the overall feel of the group that's there, field.
Well, every person's body position is an antenna and is a tuning device. So as you place yourself in different positions, you're tuning in, but you're also broadcasting. It's two-way.
It's two-way, yeah. So in some ways I feel like I'm tuning up something higher, but then also able to broadcast. Yeah, there's a lot of intelligence in the hands. Like, just look at these fingers and what they can do together. Like someone who plays guitar or plays piano, there's a lot of acuity in the hands that we don't make use of. Really, images with the hands turned up, of course turned up to the sun, which they called the sun disk. And that was the source of life. Everything was generated from the sun. So I love this. You have the big set of hands here. Somebody's on top of the head and they got their hands going, and you've got this other hands. Same thing here, and this is more hands in the power position. So, electrical capacitors and other tools. If you were to go to an Egyptian museum, you would see these, and they would say they're hand mirrors. So they think, Egyptians were really, into cosmetics and things like that, so they needed hand mirrors. But look here, and the similarity between this thing in the middle, which is known as a capacitor, which the author, he just purchased one of these capacitors, and similar to what's called the hand mirrors, it's a device that allows you to draw off excessive static electricity that's settled as a field on something. They're used these days to whisk away static electricity around sensitive machinery, computers and other devices that are used for reading and registering things. So the static electricity can actually interfere with the equipment and its reading of things. So the author is proposing that these are not hand mirrors. If you look at this one here, it actually has the technical instructions on the back of it.
I think another thing to note is that if you were making, well, okay, I have one of what's the equivalent of this. They would be a terrible mirror, no matter how well you polish them. You're not going to really, you'd be better to go down to the stream and look in the water to see yourself. But all of the handles are insulating materials. So when you think about it, if you're going to cast this, why wouldn't you make it all in one piece? Why would you always have to handle something different? But if it was an insulating device, of course you would have to handle something different. So again, that's what you saw in those previous pictures. It was all, it was not designed for you to take the charge into you unless you wanted it to.
No. So we can see here, we're starting to get into some interesting images where here we have a worker, a priest, or some sort of temple worker that's holding this capacitor, potentially that could remove ambient static electricity. And here we have the pharaoh who's raised up on something that could be wood so that they're ungrounded and they're charging themselves up with this lightning rod of sorts. We've got the bird above, could be an image of Horus, so there's this connection to the higher dimensions. And the temple worker here working with a capacitor to remove any unnecessary static electricity. We're not talking about electricity like current electricity, like voltage and like we use. We're talking about something that's much more subtle, but nonetheless very powerful in its own right. Crystals. Now, in terms of chairs, this is Tutankhamun's gold foil covered chair. What he's circling here is that the pegs are made of wood. Wood is not a conductive material. It's what I call it? Inductive. Insulator. Insulates. Whereas the chair is covered with gold, so anyone sitting in there could get charged up because they're not grounded. The legs are insulating and don't allow the passage of electricity.
Plus, as you saw in the previous picture, even though they were sitting in the chair, their feet were not sitting on the ground. There was something that their feet were sitting on, as you can see in this picture.
Yes.
So, which could easily have been wood or something like that again. So they're being charged, but they're not being grounded.
So I'm very interested in this, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But first of all, look, again, on the back of the chair, it's like the technical instructions on how to use this electric chair. With the insulating legs, the pharaoh's feet off the ground, and the priestess touching, so there's a transfer of energy happening here. The author, James Ernest Brown, he actually purchased a replica of this chair. There is a company in the States that makes these chairs. And guess what? My birthday's coming up this Saturday.
Subtle.
Can you think of a better place for a replica of King Tut's chair than here in the loft?
Everyone pool your resources.
Exactly. I'm going to start up one of those.
GoFundMes?
Huh?
GoFundMes?
GoFundMe's, yes, GoFundMe for a replica of King Tut's chair.
Go chair me.
Go chair me, where like anybody can sit in here. It's not just for me. We can all. It's 100 pounds made out of crushed stone with designer rosin that has the same insulating thing. Apparently, it's like a perfect replica. So we got 1 week till my birthday. It's only, with shipping, it's going to be, I go about $2,500.
Which
I thought was pretty cheap.
Not as bad as I
Touch
thought.
chair. Huh?
Yeah, not as bad as I thought.
No, I was surprised.
Yeah, but if it's not gold, then what's the point?
There's actually a used one for sale
Yeah.
on eBay. So I'd be happy with the used one. The guy says it's never been sat in, which I think, I don't know if I believe that.
I don't think it would ruin it.
No. So, anyways,
Jesse, before you move on to that, their headpieces seem really interesting. Do you think those are also conductors and uses?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. We'll get to that in a moment. There's a lot in this image. We'll come back to this image further into the book because everything means something. The Egyptologists often thought, these are just pictures of day-to-day life in Egypt, the way they lived and so forth. But no, these are important technical instructions that the Egyptians preserved for future generations. So what I'm saying is that you and I as Egyptians had this stuff preserved so that you and I as moderns could remember what we knew back then and bring it into modern times so we can have full power.
Well, this is ultimately Numerian technology, right?
Well, okay, that's a really good point. And some people might find this a bit weird, but in my reading of Rudolf Steiner, he says that, when Atlantis, and it's not so hard to accept that there was very intelligent civilizations that lived before, and peaked,
Pre-Diluvian.
and pre-Diluvian civilizations that peaked and then went down, and that some of the Atlanteans went through Europe and laid stuff there, and then off into China, and other Atlanteans went through Africa, Egypt, and then on into India to lay down the new wisdom there. And so definitely I have that from the horse's mouth, Rudolf Steiner, that the Egyptians were inheriting the legacy of Atlantean knowledge. Now conditions in Atlantis were quite different again and their consciousness was quite different again from what the Egyptians were and what we are today. But nonetheless, what could be used from the Atlantean knowledge, especially the connecting to the multi-dimensions? Because spiritual evolution has been about a descent down. It's about consciousness rolling out into form, creating form into which consciousness can live. And so earlier civilizations were much more connected this way. We're very much connected this way. Now the key is to balance all this. Just looking here, we've got people sitting on chairs, and the author has circled what looks like the so-called hand mirrors, but really are capacitors that could be whisking away or holding static electricity in a stable way as things get amped up. To look more at these capacitors and batteries. Same thing again. There. Now we're on to animal fur. There's Egyptians love their cats. They even mummied their cats. They've found over 1 million mummified cats in Egypt. Not just because they were cute and whatnot, but they had a place in their ritual. As you can see, they're great as capacitors. You've all experienced that with cats. You know how they like to brush by your leg? There's an exchange of electrons with your leg. And of course then you go down to like stroke it really hard and they're like off because
Like, I just took some energy from you. Get away from me, don't make me back.
yeah, well they're kind of balancing themselves. You know, they're probably lying on a nylon carpet under the bed and they have to kind of like shake it off.
My capacitor's an asshole. So my capacitor's kind of an asshole.
Cat ambassador.
Oh, it's just getting better. That's
So
clever.
here we see images of cats
Under the chair.
under the chair.
Because that cat passes you.
And notice how they all have their feet off the ground. They're ungrounded as they get charged up.
And everybody else is grounded.
Yes. So that's going to create a flow of electrons.
So is that like a natural acupuncture treatment? Electrical charge or?
Might be stronger. Sounds like a hardcore activation.
Well, this is the question, and we decided we're going to be slow to answer those sorts of questions about, you know, why they're doing this and what it was for, and so forth. Right now, we're just looking at what they're doing. So
We'll get to that, don't worry.
we'll get to that. This is an interesting image here. It's like the top half is the technical manual, like preparing, getting into position. And then what do you notice on the bottom layer?
We put hats on.
It looks like a hat, but it could also indicate that they're in an electrified state. That they're generating.
Their crowns open up.
Yeah, the crown chakra, this pole is being turned on.
It could even be representing the chakras above the top chakra.
Well, certainly, as we look into the more metaphysical aspects of the human. But he doesn't get too much into that. He really tries to keep it more in the scientific realm. So he doesn't talk about chakras. He's just saying that looks like they're in an electrified state. And we are electric beings. We're not just biochemical beings. We're definitely electric beings. And science and medicine is understanding that more and more. Gold-covered ceremonial chamber fits the profile of a Faraday cage. Anybody want to explain what a Faraday cage is?
Sure. So, Faraday cage is basically when you're inside, you are isolated from all the fields outside the chamber. So it's like a totally neutral space. It's been, I mean, there's some incredible shots here. Just even that box that, you have in the bottom right there. So again, here they are showing a commercial one just covered in wire. Well, of course, the Egyptians tend to like to use gold. So that is that can function as a capacitor, but when you're inside, you're in a neutral space.
Neutral space, yeah.
Yeah,
So that's
very neutral.
the Faraday cage, or what Egyptologists call a ceremonial chamber. Again, was all about electricity. And the bottom here, Egyptologists call this a sled bed. It sort of looks like a sled, but it's got a wooden base, so it's not grounded. And it's coated with gold, which is one of the best conductors. Yeah, so these are modern day Faraday cages developed by Faraday back in 1836. Create a neutral zone electrically. And these are found all over Egypt. And here he's got, this is one that the author made. He made his own Faraday cage. And look, he's got his replica of the King Tut chair. You know, like, this is almost a bit like a Faraday cage, what we got here. You know, with all the biogeometry and corrections I've got on. I've corrected all the electrical and so forth. So, truly, I think this would be the perfect place for one of these chairs. Here, we're starting to get into the transfer of energy. And in this first picture, there's the rubbing the hands together. These are gold toe covers here. So building up a charge in the hand, then you could transfer it into the toes, into the points there.
And nipple cups.
Yeah,
This is fun.
no nipples. But yeah, these gold nipple covers. So the nipples obviously are transceivers, right? They transmit milk and energy, but they're also receivers. There's a lot going on in the nipples.
Well, and they're a pathway. So they're a pathway.
Right. Yeah, they're the portal to a pathway. So you've got eyelid covers up here, you've got tongue cover, nipple covers. Those Egyptians had you covered.
Right. This is just foiled gold, like 100% gold.
Yep, 100% gold. Yeah, just like a thin.
They have no shortage of gold. That's what I
Right.
see.
No. It's not from that. I just wanted to know how to see it. It's not like, oh wow, there's so much. I'm not thinking
You got fingertip
more.
covers. This is a mummy's hand. So people were entombed with gold tips. Largely because if someone worked with, as a healer, worked with gold fingertips, they would really imprint their own energy into them. So that's why they wouldn't be passed on to somebody else. They would be entombed, mummified with their own gold tips.
The other thing to remember too is that, you know, that gold represents wisdom. So it was you could be transmitting knowledge, not just electricity.
Well, and gold also esoterically connects to the sun. It's the element of the sun, which we'll see in the pictures is really the central generative force. Toe covers,
I love
gold
the
sandals. They'd be great on the French Riviera, real hit. And then back to this ceremonial chamber, Faraday cage, with this place where you would stand off the ground, where you place your gold covered sandals. Getting ready to potentially electrify your sperm. Okay, back to ancient Egypt and back to a future for mankind. This is really what it's about. This is an investment in ourselves, not in informative learning, but transformative learning. I'm hoping that we're all awakening a sense of knowing of this stuff deep within our core, deep within our DNA, that we have a sense of growing confidence that we know this stuff, we can do this stuff. Because this is the technology, this ancient technology needs to be married with the new technology to make our passage into the future safe and sustaining. That's what this is about. I want to impress that on you. This whole series is about awakening to who we are and what we have. Chapter 7, batteries and other electrical devices. So, yes, indeed, there is proof that the Egyptians were working with batteries. Are you familiar with the Baghdad battery story?
I am. So, the Baghdad battery was discovered a bunch of years ago, but nobody wanted to accept that it was a battery. They found remnants of dried lemon juice inside, which would have helped create an acid in order to get some potential voltage. Didn't create a huge voltage, I don't know, volt and a half. But I think the important thing to understand is that these things could have been connected in series, in which case you're just limited by how many, jars you have. Really, that's the only limitation, and a bit of the material inside. So
Again, pottery jars found in King Tut's tomb that could have been used as batteries. And how much voltage?
I think the Baghdad battery, they got about a volt or a volt and a third or something like that out of it.
But then when they're done in series,
Well, then once you go into series, and keep in mind they were connecting things with either copper or gold, so you have pretty efficient series potential here.
yeah. So here's
So there
much
you go.
of Baghdad batteries hooked up in series.
Hooked up in series. And for some of the things they wanted to do, they didn't need like thousands of volts,
Right.
as we will touch upon shortly.
Such as the secret ingredient, celestial timing. And what the author points out is that there's a similarity between the shape of the hat or the head of Osiris and what's known as the analema. And the analema is the shape of the sun's course in the sky over the course of 1 year, 365 days, that it does a pattern that looks, great, where'd you find that? Oh, thank you. That is, sort of looks like a figure eight or an infinity sign, and that Osiris being the regent of the sun, as we can see up here, the sun radiating down from Osiris with his hands turned up, that following the patterns of the sun was important as a secret ingredient, an ingredient in doing things at the right time. And we're totally out of touch with that these days in terms of doing things, based on cosmic events. Unless you're like woo-woo and you're into astrology. But one of the best examples where I see that's being brought back now is in biodynamic agriculture, which is a form of farming developed by Rudolf Steiner, where planting and harvesting is done not only based on the sun and the moon, but other planets and their phases and so forth. So the analema is looks like it was part of their thinking, and Osiris was a symbol of that knowledge and wisdom. I'm not going to get into a lot around the analema because it's a bit complex, but suffice to say that they had incredible knowledge of what was going on in the sky. And you're saying how much this blows your mind because of the length of some of the cycles.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at the Mayan calendar where they have units of time that are hundreds of thousands of years. And they were studying cycles, precession, just take precession. That's over 25,000 years. So in other words, to watch one cycle took you 25,000 years. If you're going to look for a pattern, you'd probably have to look at it twice. Now we're at 50,000 years. So
Nobody was around that long, so this knowledge was being.
well, it depends where you got the knowledge. Okay, so or it depends on your record keeping. Again, there's incredible records that were kept by these cultures.
Osiris with his characteristic cap, and this is what's known as a Senate board. And of course, the Egyptologists say this is like a kid's game, you know, like a checker or chess game with these markers, which also have that characteristic look, like Osiris hat. But in fact, this could be, as Brown says, a device for mathematically figuring out the precession of the planets in the elliptic or the ecliptic pattern. So there's the ecliptic on the board, and here's the different star zones. So this is one of the ways they were able to tabulate what was going on celestially, and so the timing of their rituals on Earth would be done in alignment and accord with celestial events. Here's examples of other so-called board games from other cultures. And here's a picture from a papyrus of the Senate board. Next to what Egyptologists call an offering table, that this table here is covered with things for offering, and they're just sitting here playing this board game. I suppose because they're bored, waiting for their offering to be accepted or something. But of course, Egyptologists are coming out of kind of this colonial mindset that doesn't understand what's going on. You can see here with these jagged things that something's being electrified. You've got these radiations coming off of these things here in the table, and below you've got batteries and capacitors underneath it, all holding electricity, holding charges. And they're off the ground too. See how they're all sitting on something?
Little stands.
Little stands, so the electricity that's in them cannot be grounded out. So they're amping up the space and electrifying whatever is on what the author calls a transformation table, not an offering table. And obviously the timing is right. And they're also being electrified because they're off the ground. They're on chairs that are sitting on non-conductive material. What do you call that again? Insulators. Yes. That's what they have on the coating of electric cables. They're insulators, so that the electricity running through the wires cannot escape. So they're off the ground. So something's happening here. What and why? Now, what's interesting about this picture is that we're starting to look at the manipulation of atomic substance, atomic matter. So have a look at this image here. Procedures for manipulating atomic structures. In this image, we've got a magnified image of the atomic structure of platinum, magnified 750,000 times. Here's an old bronze disc that's 3,200 years old. And he's pointing out the similarity between what an atom looks like and what's depicted in some of their iconography. did the Egyptians actually know what atoms looked like? Did they have some sort of sense that wasn't coming through microscopes, but through more of a shamanistic, clairvoyant way?
Well, even if you want to accept, the Greeks discovering it, Democritus is the one who came up with the term atom because it means indivisible. And that's like 50 BC or something like that. And I think it's important to understand that the Greeks got lots of stuff from the Egyptians.
A lot more than is acknowledged.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Because Pythagoras lived in Egypt
Exactly.
for 17 years and studied the Egyptian initiation rites.
I mean, the basic thing was if you wanted to learn things, you had to go to Egypt because that's where it was. That was the spot.
But you can see even in the shift in consciousness from the Egyptians, who are obviously working on another level, a multi-dimensional level, to the Greeks, who are much more in their head, much more in their bodies, and much more in their thinking, much more in objective thinking. The Greeks were becoming more ego. They were becoming more individuals. In the Greek times, that was the birth of democracy and the state that respected individual rights and so forth. So, big shift in consciousness where they're thinking about things and talking about things, but the Egyptians were actually doing this magic. You don't hear much about magic out of Greek culture or Roman culture.
Well, Arthur Clarke said magic is a technology that you don't understand.
Right, and the Greeks lost the understanding. They were talking about things rather than working with the field. And that's and we talk about how we're, living this Western, the Greeks were the birth of Western civilization. So that's what we're living in. We're really living in much more of a kind of dumbed down, numbed down spiritual culture compared to what was prior to the birth of the classic period. So here we've got a magnified picture of the platinum atom, iridium atom, and what are these here on this table? This transformation table. The author is suggesting that at the base of the table are representations of atomic structure of atoms. And these other things on top are being prepared to be affected. Here we've got the power position, the hands here ready to transmit. We've got Horus here with an electrical rod in one hand, is holding the ankh in the other, and of course a connection to the sun overhead. Sun here, sun here, which in my own view is about connecting our upper chakra with the solar center. That we have a solar chakra above the head, fifth one up, that we can connect with the solar center of our solar system. There's a lot going on.
A lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've got the transformation table. You've got a capacitor underneath it that's got this spiraling serpent, so it's showing how an electrical force is coming off of it. First thing on the table is the atom. You've got the priestess, her hands in the power position. You've got Horus here, that's holding an electrical rod that also has this serpentine thing around it. He's got a flail. Flail is used for guiding energy. There's the sun disk, the eyes of Horus, and then this upper chakra, and this emanation coming down. So this transmission of something higher down into the priestess. Similar thing here, you got these capacitors hanging underneath the table, sitting in a chair that's raised, so ungrounded. And then this priestess, she's in electrified state because you can see this kind of flame on top of her head. And she's pouring something on top of the objects, which also look like they're in an electrified state. Got the flail. Here's a jed. So I'm going to pass this around. This is known as a jed waj. It's an instrument developed by Dr. Cream, who developed biogeometry, and it's based on shape and number, so that the design will actually emit particular qualities of energy out the base of it. It's not about the material is just wood. But because of the number and shape that make it up, it has this power. It's very good for like healing. You can put it on areas of your body where it needs transmission of beneficial energies. So I'll pass that around and you can enjoy this scene with the palm of your hand. The palm is very sensitive, or you can try some other area that might need something. Same thing again. Electrified state, hands in the power position, capacitors, atoms on the table. These are opened up. These could be blue lotus flowers, which were used in these sort of procedures because there'd be the amplification of energy would heat things up in a way so that these flowers they have kind of they have a psychoactive property to them. Blue lotus.
Still used today.
Still used today, yeah. Would emit something into the space, would be diffused into the space. Okay, now we get to manipulating atomic structure with human electricity, or as I like to call it, erectricity. Because here they have at the temple in what's this? Edfu Temple to Horus. Here we have the god Min and what's known as Iphallus, or erect state. This is what we're up against. Is knowledge. Important knowledge is hard to come by. And I'm so thankful for James Ernest Brown. This guy, I think, is in his 20s, got passionate about understanding Egypt, and then spent decades going and photographing all this stuff, and now putting these books out to correct the erroneous information that we were taught in school. And I got to say that, from my own personal experience, growing up with a dumbed down version of history and a dumbed down version of science, which is just a materialistic science that excludes all the metaphysical aspects, I feel it affected me. I feel it affected me in a negative way that limited my perception of who I am as a human being, as a spiritual being, and caused problems in my life growing up. If I had been told the truth and given a more accurate picture of the greatness of what we have, my life would have taken a much different course. Instead, it's like I've had my head stuck in the earth, not able to lift up and look at the other dimensions that are there.
Then they couldn't control you, Jesse.
Well, this is
That's
it.
the problem.
This is it. I'm as mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore.
Good.
This is why I'm doing this. This is why we're here, to set the record straight, to get things straight. Because it is affecting you. It is affecting your psyche, your psychology, your spiritual evolution, your mental health, your physical health, and your ability to enjoy life to the full. Because as I read at the beginning from the book of Psalms, you make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence. with eternal pleasures at your right hand. We've been deprived of that. We've not been able to follow the path of life and enjoy the presence of the divine and electricity and all of that, because we've been given a false story, such as with here, this thing which Egyptologists say that it's a censer for burning incense. No, what's this hand there for? This hand is out to collect sperm. It's things like an ancient hand job to get the sperm that was being electro-ejaculated from the pharaoh. Very well, as the Monty Python sings, every sperm is sacred. Remember that song? Every sperm is sacred. We'll sing that at the end. So there we have the god Min. So why is it the god Min is erect? Well, because when it came to rituals, the pharaoh would actually be embodying the god. So when the pharaoh was ejaculating electrified sperm, it really was coming from a higher place. It was coming from a god through the pharaoh, because pharaohs were considered to be the embodiment of a god. Look at that beautiful relief on a wall in one of the temples.
Release on the wall or relief on the
Mm-hmm. Well, it'll certainly be a relief when you release. So here's a sperm collector, and that's the head of Horus, so forth. And here's an image of the sperm collector, and then being poured.
Well, on the top, with you have that little figure in the middle. You can scroll down just for a second. No, the other one. Top. So you have that little figure there with this container in front of them, like again representing they're collecting something or accumulating something.
Oh, I love this image here. We've got a pharaoh, high palace, off the ground. It's got this straight line here, showing that this is a chamber, Faraday cage, and then you've got these wavy lines showing that there's an electrified state taking place.
Or snakes.
Yeah, the snakes indicate that there's electrical, and you've got the temple workers here with their hands in a power position, and then there's this emission that's taking place, and here you've got this energy that's being gathered. Thus is being gathered as the pharaoh is emanating all this energy. You've got the sun here, you've got the stars, presence of gods, so everything's in alignment. And that they've actually photographed the moment when a sperm breaks through the egg and there's an explosion of electricity. Every sperm has electricity in it already. This is one of the reasons why they're doing this ritual, is to amplify the electricity in the sperm, so that at this moment, there's electricity being emitted. This was interesting, having images of the god lying on his front, perhaps getting ready for a discharge, lying on a sled bed on the front. Suggestion that this might have been the position for a discharge of electrified sperm. Here is an interesting image you find in different places, that these gods are in this crouched position. And the author is suggesting that having them in this crouched position really emphasizes the fact that these gods are connecting to the celestial bodies and the forces that are being emanating from the celestial bodies. In fact, the ancients believed that the celestial bodies were higher beings, that they were gods, that they had a spiritual presence. And that may very well be the case, that everything in the universe has a living presence. Every star, every planet is the body of an intelligence. And here, with this crouched position, it's similar to this graph that shows the pulsations of a planet. So along here we see high and low bursts from the planets. So yeah, what we're looking at here is the importance of timing and the connection to these star gods. This is a nice image here. We've got a lot going on.
It's almost too much going on.
Yeah. Well, we've got the star gods up above, pulsing in synchronicity, as planets do. We know the sun. Without a pulse, there's no life. Life is indicated by a pulse. When your pulse is gone from your body, there's no life. And so even with the sun and the planets, there's this pulsing because there's a living quality to them, a balance, to sacrament of some sort. And similar, here we've got all these star gods in the star god position, pulsing the planetary forces that are each in their own individual chamber. So this is as far as I want to go in the book. There's other things, but I want to stop at this point and just take time to reflect on what this is, what's going on here, and take any questions. I'm not going to necessarily answer things because this is the first step in exploring some of the ancient Egyptian wisdom. And in a month we're going to be looking at the structure of the pyramid and what that was all about. Were these tombs for kings and pharaohs, or were they for some other purpose?